Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Canon R5 Mark II, a camera that I actually really like. I got it about a week and a half ago, and I think it's a huge improvement over the original version, but it still has a fair amount of things that I find kind of annoying about it. But there's not a lot of videos about the things that I think could be improved, many of which could probably be done in a firmware update. So for me, when I get a new camera, the thing that I go to first is all the custom modes. I want to be able to dial that in with my fingers on the camera for an immediate change in my settings. I don't want to be going through menus and kind of toggling through things. I want to be able to click a button and have it change right away. And I can do that like probably 80% of the way that I want to on this camera, but I still want some more. I was able to play with a Sony A9 III this summer, and that thing is like driving a Ferrari, which I've never actually done, but people talk about things like a Ferrari. I think Canon is like a 2024 Toyota Camry. It's really nice. It's refined. In some ways, it's kind of elegant. It's got some zip to it. It's got a lot of power, but it's not a Ferrari. And so I really want kind of all those custom options, and I just don't get that with this camera. For some reason, Canon disables some buttons from being customizable, and on some buttons, they don't give you all the custom options. I don't know why we can't have all buttons be customizable and have all the options for each of those buttons. So for example, there's a rating button where you can rate your images after you take them. And there are some things that you can change with this, but it mostly is about playback. I would love to have that set as like a focus button or a drive mode button or something else. And I can't do that for some strange reason. So it essentially renders this button worthless to me because I don't actually use that for playback. I would also love to see them add more toggle buttons or buttons where if you held onto them and then released it, your settings would change and then change back. You can kind of do this a little bit with the burst mode setting, which I think is actually kind of nice, although I would like it to be better. For example, I have my burst mode set on the depth of field preview button because normally I shoot like 5 to 7 frames per second, but there are some times where maybe I want 30 frames per second. And that mode is actually really nice. Like it's way faster than I would ever need, but it's nice to have. But when I do that, because I shoot back button focus, I have to have one finger on the shutter, one finger on the back button focus, and then I have to have a third finger on the depth of field preview button to toggle that burst mode. I would love it if I could combine that with like my back button focus, for example, but for some reason I can't do it. And I could absolutely do this on a Sony camera. Now there is one custom setting where you can kind of enable things like this, and this is called the register recall function. And I'll do a separate video on this because I think it's definitely worth it. And it's actually only something that I kind of found out about recently, which I'm a little embarrassed about because I've been using Canon cameras for almost 20 years. But anyway, the register recall function is actually pretty cool because it's a button that if you hold down, you can go to a completely different set of settings. And then when you release that button, you go back to whatever you were doing. You can change the autofocus, you can change all sorts of different stuff. You can change the shutter speed, the aperture. The one thing that it seems like you can't change is the drive mode. And I would love it if I could go from my normal 5 frames per second to 30 frames per second just by holding a button. And it seems like they must have forgot to include that in this setting. And so that would really kind of change things. The other thing that would be really nice is if you could also add PreCapture to this. PreCapture is a really cool setting that they included in this camera, but they buried it in the menus. And so I would love PreCapture for those times where you think that a moment's going to happen, but you don't quite exactly know when. It would allow me to have that extra half second to capture some of those photos that might lead to a great photo later on because you caught the moment. But as it currently stands, I have to enable that and disable that in the menu system, which kind of defeats the purpose unless I want to have it on all the time. Because if I'm looking for a moment, I'm not going to be in the menu system playing around to enable it. And then I miss the moment, right? And so if this is something that I could either put on a register recall button or some other totally different button, either toggle it on and off or hold it and release it, it would make this a far more useful setting. I've got to think that this is going to be something that they include in a future firmware update because I've seen a lot of complaints about it online. So I guess we'll kind of see. But different things like that, they just don't really make sense. And I don't understand why Canon disables some of those functions when enabling them wouldn't really change the camera in any worse way. So anyway, maybe you work at Canon in the firmware division and you could reply back in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong, but it seems like this is kind of an easy no-brainer thing. Okay, next up, one thing that I find super annoying is that they talk about this dual photo and video mode, which sounds really cool in theory. And it's something that I can actually do on my iPhone, and I kind of enjoy it every once in a while, where I'm taking a video and I can click the camera button and get a separate photo file and video file. And they talk about it in this camera, and so I was really excited. But it's limited to HD video, which, I mean, really, are we shooting HD video anymore? I mean, essentially pretty much everybody's shooting 4K, right? And you only get JPEG images. So this is totally worthless to me because I'm not shooting an HD video and I'm shooting everything in RAW. So I think that this is something that could have been done way better. I don't know if this is a hardware issue or a software issue, but if it's a software issue, I would love to see this fixed because I think I would actually use this a lot when I'm shooting video so that I could quickly grab a still. Okay, next annoyance, eye control. I was really excited about this. I've been excited about eye control since it was on Canon film cameras because in theory, it sounds incredibly cool. Like it sounds like one of the next evolutions in camera technology. In practice, I find that my eye is darting around the viewfinder in a way that hurts my brain. That thing is going all over the place and it seems so random. I spend more time consciously trying to move my eye around the viewfinder than I do actually thinking about the photo, and then I don't get the photo that I want. So I was pretty excited about this eye control feature, but if that's something that's like determining your decision about whether to buy this camera or not, I would really reconsider because I don't think that you're going to be very happy with it. Maybe some firmware update in the future is going to refine this better, but right now it's just not ready for prime time, which is a huge disappointment because it was on the Canon R3 and people had some complaints about it and they said it was so much better, but I just don't think it is for most people, especially with some of the comments that I'm reading online. Okay, last annoyance that I have that's firmware related comes to deleting images. Now, I get that most people don't want to delete a lot of their images in camera, but if I have a series of things that I don't like, I find it just far easier to delete them at the time. They did include this option to delete an entire scene, which is really nice, especially if you take a large burst of photos and you don't like them. You can delete just that burst, which is a huge improvement from having to go through each of them individually. That said, other camera manufacturers like Sony allow you to have this like double delete function. So you can enable this in the menu and you hit delete once, and then you hit the delete button again, and it deletes that photo. It sounds like a silly thing, but it's a huge quality of life improvement if you're deleting a lot of photos, compared to the Canon system where you have to hit the delete button, and then you have to scroll around on the little wheel or use the joystick or whatever to get to the delete function on the screen and then click it again. Being able to just click delete twice would make things so much easier for us, and I think that it's something that they could easily do. All right, so second half of my annoyance video is about some physical issues with the camera. And for the most part, it's actually really well built and I think it's well thought out. It feels great in your hand, but there's still a couple of things that I think they really could have improved on. First up has to do with USB charging of the camera. I have no idea why you can't just plug a regular USB cable, like USB-C cable, into this camera and charge your battery. For some reason, you have to buy a special adapter from Canon, and they talk about this in the actual Canon manual. And most people might be thinking like, okay, so why does that matter? I've got my battery charger. What if you forget your battery charger before you travel? Because I know that I've done this, and it really kind of stinks because then you're limited to whatever capacity you have on that specific battery. And unless you're in a huge city where there's a big camera store or you can get 2-day Amazon shipping, you're not taking any more photos once your battery runs out, when all they needed to do was just enable you to charge this camera with any USB-C cable that you have laying around for all your other gear. So I think that that was a huge oversight and it would have made things far easier for us. At the very least, I think they could have at least included the USB charging adapter so you could kind of keep that in your bag as a backup option. I think it was kind of petty that they make you pay for this. Speaking of charging, I'm a little skeptical of the new batteries. For the first day I had this, I spent most of the time just kind of like playing around with the settings, and I took a handful of photos, maybe like 20 or 30 photos, but for the most part, I was just focused on the settings, and I had the screen on the back on a lot, but the battery wore out way faster than I anticipated, and I got totally down to zero in like just a couple of hours of simply playing around with settings. So I'm a little worried about how long this battery is going to last in practice. And then the other thing too is that we have to buy brand new batteries. All the batteries that we had before work for certain things on this camera, but some other functions are disabled. And how much does that stink? Because I have like 5 or 6 Canon batteries, including the ones from the original R5, that work like a little bit in this camera, but have some other features disabled. And so I have to get new batteries at $80 a battery. And then what's going to happen with the next version of cameras? Am I going to have to buy all new batteries then too? I think that this is something that could have been handled a lot more elegantly. And finally, the last annoyance that I have with this camera is the storage. I have no idea why you couldn't put in both a CF Express card and an SD card into the same slot and then have 2 of those instead of having one CF Express and one SD card. I would much rather have 2 CF Express slots, even though they're more expensive, because it's going to really help with buffering. It just seems like this could future-proof the camera, and it's something that other camera manufacturers are doing in the sense that you can put in either type of media into the same slot, and it doesn't seem like that it would add a lot of space to the camera. I think that this was a bit of an oversight, and I really would have liked to have seen this changed. So that's kind of my list of annoyances for this camera. That said, those are far overshadowed by how much I love it. And I'm going to talk about that in a separate video because this is a huge technological improvement, especially with the autofocus, which is astounding. I actually can't believe how good the autofocus is. And that's probably the primary reason that I even bought it. So overall, I'm very happy. We'll talk about that in the next video. In the comment section, why don't you put the things that you're annoyed by? There's a chance that I might have some answers for you because I was probably annoyed by those things and then found some workarounds in the manual, for example. And maybe some of the things that I'm annoyed by, you have some solutions to. So definitely put those in the comments because I would love to hear about that. And maybe I can help you out because I spent a lot of time in the manual and on the internet forums and everything else looking for some solutions to how I could customize this as much as I possibly could to meet my needs. And lastly, liking the video costs nothing, but it really helps me out. And if you subscribe, then you can see the next video where I talk about all the things that I like about this. And the next video after that, where I'm going to talk about some of the menu settings that I change for shifting between documentary work as well as doing some kind of like flash portraiture where I rely heavily on manual. So pay attention to that. And if you're at Canon, especially in like the firmware updating division, please make sure to save this particular video because I think with some of these ideas in a potential future firmware update, I think that this camera could be a powerhouse that would really overtake some of the other stuff on the market, especially the A9 III, aside from that whole global shutter thing that, you know, if you're a Canon, feel free to email, text, carrier pigeon, whatever, because I think we could have a really good conversation. Anyway, thanks a lot. Bye.